familiar. So if you don't know by now, then you should probably get familiar.
Hey guys, I'm Dingosig and welcome to my first GOAT format video on Jinzo&Tonic channel. So in this video I am going to do a deck profile of my Chaos Return deck, which I used to get first place at 2 tournaments online. So the first tournament I won was an ACS. So ACS stands for AGTBLS Championship Series. So those tournaments are organized by AGTBLS, a well-known member of the community, and basically his idea was to fill the gap between major tournaments like FLCs and GFCs with smaller tournaments. And this tournament had about 30 entrants. I think it was 28 or 29, and so it was not as big as tournaments like GFC, but it was still decent, and there was some good player in it, and it was very fun. I was very happy about this win because it was my first tournament result ever. And then I also won with the same deck, the GFC 3v3 with my teammates Wawa and Lucas, also known as Lucas the Heretic. So shout out to my teammates for doing so well during that tournament. So we all of us got our invite for World Championship. So I don't think I am a very good player, to be honest. I'm still pretty inexperienced compared to a lot of other players in the format, and I still do a lot of mistakes. But despite that, I do quite well in tournaments, and I think the deck I'm using has a lot to do with that because I think it's really strong. So the deck was to make the deck, I took inspiration from ACP return deck list, and I made it a lot more aggro. So I'm going to explain why in a minute. First, I'm going to talk about return and why I think it's a good card in GOAT format. So return is very nice because a lot of the time it's pretty much a win button. Like you just flip it and you will be able to do tons of damage by bringing back tons of monsters. So that's really strong. And I think it's really hard to play around because you can use it during your battle phase. So you can attack with a bunch of monsters. Your opponent might use back row in response to those attacks, and then you can flip return and your opponent won't have any answer anymore. So yeah, I think that's quite strong. And I think return is good in the current meta because one of the ways you can stop a return play is by flipping Scapegoat, for example. Unless you have Azura or stuff like Tiger won't go on the field, of course, but most of the time Scapegoat is an okay card against return, and we don't really see Scapegoat as much in the current metagame. So it's definitely a good thing for return decks. Also, we can see that a lot of people are playing Kaiku as a way to deal with Chaos decks, and Kaiku is always annoying to face, don't get me wrong, but I think it's not as effective against a return deck in the sense that it can be more tricky to play for your opponent because he has to decide if he wants to banish stuff from your graveyard to prevent a Chaos Sorcerer, and if he does, then he might enable a return play by banishing your monsters. So yes, that's definitely a good thing. So in a sense, playing a Chaos return deck makes you not as weak as Kaiku compared to if you were playing a Chaos Turbo deck, for example. One other cool thing about return is that pretty much every deck, or almost every competitive deck in the format, bar a few exceptions, play Chaos Sorcerer, and of course it's never good to get your monster banished by Chaos Sorcerer, but at least in this deck you can actually do stuff with the monsters that your opponent's Sorcerer will banish, so that's a nice plus. And in some games I I actually used my BLS a bit more aggressively, because I knew that if my opponent summoned a Chaos Sorcerer to get rid of it, I would have the return to gain him back and potentially finish the game. So yeah, I think that's an interesting upside of return. Also, one thing that ACP said in his video is that return is very good with triple Dekochi, triple Spy in this current meta, and I agree because of the Nobleman interaction. Basically, if your opponent use a Nobleman of Crossout on your Gravekeeper Spy or on your Dekochi, you will banish all three from your decks, and then if you flip return, you will be able to bring back the triple Spy or the triple Dekochi on the field to deal a lot of damage, so that's really good. But what's really interesting is that it works the other way around. Like if you use your Nobleman of Crossout against your opponent's set monster, if you're playing against Chaos Turbo, since most Chaos Turbo use both Dekochi and Spy, there is a really high chance that by using Nobleman you will hit a Dekochi or a Spy. And if that's the case, you will banish yours from your deck as well, which will also enable the return play. So I think this flip engine with the Nobleman interaction makes return a lot more consistent, so you don't have to only rely on Chaos Sorcerer or your opponent Kaiku or stuff like that to fill your banish pile. So I think that's really important in a return deck. So as you can see, my list is still quite different from ACP deck list because mine is a lot more aggro. I play stuff like Solemn Judgment, more beaters like Play Knight. And one of the reasons I do this is, of course, first is because it fits more my playstyle. I like to play more aggressive decks. But outside of that, it's mainly because I think return is better in aggressive decks. You're generally using return to finish off your opponents, so if you have a deck that can apply early game pressure and inflict a lot of damage quickly, it means that you will have an easier time putting your opponent in range for a return kill. So I think that's quite important. And also if you're playing an aggro deck, most of your monster, if not all your monster, will be strong beaters. So you make sure that all the monsters you will bring back with return will be able to do damage. Whereas if you were playing return with cards like Mission of Face or even Night Excellent, it wouldn't necessarily be bad, but you wouldn't be able to take advantage of those monsters with a return play because Face or Night Excellent don't deal much damage. So yeah, I think it's quite good to have an aggro strategy with return. Also, I think a lot of the traps that aggro decks generally use are good with return. Solemn Judgment, for example, is amazing because you can actually negate any kind of back row that will prevent a return play, which is very good. Dust Tornado is also nice because, of course, like dealing with back row is good in a return deck. And also there is a nice interaction between return and dust. If you flip dust during your opponent unfazed to destroy something, you can set return from your hand using the Tornado effect, and then you will be able to flip the return during your own turn. So that interaction was the reason why I made the decision to play Death Tornado in the main and MST in the side, so I was siding MST when going second. But looking back at it, I think this interaction is interesting, but it doesn't happen too often. So I think the best choice will be probably to still main MST because it's actually more relevant to use MST from hand than using the dust into set return combo. But yeah, that's still a nice interaction to keep in mind. So one thing you could do is to replace the book or replace the dust for the MST. So about the monsters lineup, so I talked about Dekochi and Spy. You can see that it might seem weird with aggro traps and stuff to play those flip monsters, but they're actually a lot more aggressive than what they seem to be because Dekochi is a really nice body of 1400, and can give you a quick and consistent advantage with its effect. And Gravekeeper Spy is also a very aggressive monster. Of course, it's a very good wall, but it's also strong offensively because if you flip it, you have a second copy of Spy, and if you attack with both, you can deal a lot of damage. Another upside of using Gravekeeper Spy in an aggressive deck is that if your opponent use Nobleman on your Spy and he plays Spy in his deck, he will also banish his Spy from his deck, and it means that you won't have to deal with his Spy. So it makes your Blade Knight stronger and even your Shining Angel stronger. So I think that's not super relevant, but that's definitely a cool interaction. So now let's talk a little bit about Shining Angel because it can seem like a suboptimal choice instead of Thunder Dragon or instead of Warriors. And I think in most decks, playing Thunder Dragon or playing Warriors as your light monsters is generally better. But in this deck, Shining Angel is actually quite good. And because basically, if you were playing Thunder Dragon in this deck, it wouldn't be very good. Like, Thunder Dragon is amazing in a deck with Discard Engine, with Night Excellent and Reality Break, like Chaos Turbo. And it's also very good in combination with Metamorphosis, so you can tribute to Thousand Eyes Restrict and make Dark Balter and stuff like that. But in this deck, you can see that you don't really take advantage of Thunder Dragon. Like, it just sits in hand, not doing much, unless you have Charity. And it makes your hand weaker to Death Shoot, and it makes your Blade Knight worse. So the Thunder Dragon wouldn't do too much for you in this deck. So you could play a Warrior Engine with Rota and stuff, and play a third Blade Knight, play Grandmaster Sasuke, stuff like that. But there are two issues about this. The first issue is that we already have a bunch of monsters. Like, we already have the starting point of the deck is triple Dekoichi, triple Spy, and we have the two staple being Breaker and Sengen, so we pretty much already have our Dark lineup. So if you were to add a full Warrior Engine with the Swordsman level 2, Exile Force, Don the Lug and Sasuke, stuff like that, we will end up with probably too many monsters, so we will have to play only a small Warrior Engine, and I think Reinforcement of the Army lose a lot of its value if you play less Warrior. And also, one of the biggest upside of Shining Angel is that you can actually set it. Of course, there are some Warriors that you can set, like Don the Lug, but for the most part, you're not really going to set your Warriors. Whereas with Shining Angel, it's a really good set because if your opponent attacks into it, you don't really care. And it's actually good for you because you get a Light in the Grave and you can get a search. And I said earlier that you don't really, that your opponent Nobleman of course aren't that big of a deal because you get your monsters banished for a return play, but it doesn't mean that you always want your monsters to be banished. It's always annoying to get one of your flips get hit by a knock. And especially if, for example, you have one Dekoichi in your hand and it's your only Dark in your hand, or if you really need the Spy to protect you and you really want to set something else first to bait whatever comes out, like, or even Mind Control, not just Nobleman, and Blade Knight or stuff like that, in the case of Dekoichi. So I think it's really nice to have another set. And Shining Angel also does everything we need with our aggro strategy, because it's a good beater that is live early game and that has field presence. So I think it actually has a lot of synergy with the flip engine, and it helps the deck to be very versatile. So yeah, I think it's quite good. You could argue that you could do most of those stuff by playing Mystic Tomato, but of course Mystic Tomato is dark and not a light, so you will have to still find room for all the lights, and like Thunder Dragon, so we will end up with a very big monster lineup that doesn't really allow that kind of trap lineup. So I think it's really hard to argue against Shining Angel in this deck. I think you could make a very strong Chaos Return deck without Shining Angel. I think overall Chaos Return is pretty underexplored, and there's plenty of stuff you can do with Return and Chaos monsters. But in this version of the deck with Triple Decochu, Triple Spy, I think Shining Angel is quite optimal. Also, I really like the fact that it can search for DD Warrior Lady, because DD Warrior Lady obviously is amazing with Return. And Angel can enable some crazy plays, like you can crash your Angel into your opponent monster to search DD Warrior Lady, attack with DD Warrior Lady, banish something, flip Return and bring back the DD Warrior Lady, so crazy stuff like that. So I think it's pretty cool. And also Angel has another interesting target being Wallet Barrel. So I didn't really like this card in theory at first before I tried it. And I had the second Azura main when I played the ACS. But I realized that Wallet Barrel is pretty good in the current meta if you play Angel. Because of course it has some drawback, like drawing a Wallet Barrel kind of sucks, because then you have to set it, and you pretty much have to hope for your opponent to attack into it, to flip it face up and use its effect. But if it stays face down and does nothing, it's not too great. But it's a great Angel target because you can search it and then hold something like a Kaiku or Warriors or stuff like that. And every time you have about 1 of 3 chance to destroy a monster. And it's actually pretty decent considering that most of the time Roulette Barrel will stay on the field for maybe 2 or 3 turns. So it's definitely a lot better than I thought it was. It's also decent against Spy, because if you have it face up in defense position and your opponent has a bunch of Spy, every turn you have a chance to pop 1. So yeah, it's not an amazing card by any means, but I think in the current meta it's really not that bad. And I was pleasantly surprised when I tried it. So for my other light monsters, I have 2 Blade Knights. I think Blade Knights are very good, and you don't necessarily have to play Rota and Warrior Engine to make use of it. I think it's a very nice monster. Overall, I think having a normal summon that can run over Kaiku is quite important in this deck, and it's a really nice option to have. And of course, its effect being able to negate flips is pretty nice in combination with backward removal, like just Nidos and stuff, or if your opponent's Spy are banished. So yeah, the Knight is pretty strong, I think. I only play 2 because I think it's enough, because we have 19 monsters, so we won't always be able to have only 1 card in your hand. So 19 monster isn't very high for a Chaos deck, but it's quite high in comparison to other aggro decks like Warriors. So yeah, I think 2 is fine. Also, we have a lot of field presence, like with Shining Angel and Gravekeeper Spy, which tend to stay on the field, even Bullet Barrel sometimes, so you don't really have the opportunity to activate, to negate flip effect with Blade Knight, I mean. So yeah, I think 2 is okay, and 3 maybe will be a bit cloggy, but yeah. Also, I think it's really amazing with Return, because most of the time when you use Return towards mid game or on game, your Blade Knight will most likely get the boost, and being able to bring back a 2k beater with Return is really strong to push for the game. And the last monster outside of the Chaos monsters, of course, of the deck is the Azura Priest. So I think it's probably one of the most debatable choice of the main deck. I think it's probably mandatory in the side, but maybe not in the main deck, because currently we see a lot of Warrior decks which Azura struggle against, and we see a lot of Gravekeeper Spy or Kaiku as well. So Azura Priest, yeah, it's debatable, but I think it's fine as a one-off in the main deck, because it's a way to win with Return, even if your opponent has stuff on the board, like several set monster or Scapegoat or even Mystic Tomato. And if your opponent flips Scapegoat and you have Azura Priest, like you can, if you attack with your other monster and your opponent flips the Scapegoat, you can stop the attack with Azura, and thanks to how replay works in GOAT, you can proceed to attack again with your other monsters. So in that sense, I think Azura has a good synergy with Return, being able to clear the field. And yeah, I think it's a good card on its own, but in the current meta, it's not at its best. So I say it's a debatable choice. So that's about it for the monsters. I already talked about most of the traps, so I'm not going to go over that too much. One last few things I could address is maybe torrential, because some aggro decks don't play it. But yeah, this is not this is a particular kind of aggro decks, and it has nice synergy with Return. So yeah, I think torrential is fine. One thing that could be weird is triple book in the main deck, and I think that's also debatable. You could go for 2 books, especially if you have to put the MST in the main, which I will probably end up doing. But I think book is fine even in a meta where we don't see too much control decks, because this deck doesn't have any Rageki break like Turbo, so we don't really have much out to Thousand-Eyes Restrict. We don't even have Exile Force, so if we play against control, I mean, it's nice to have triple books. And even against other decks, like book is still a pretty versatile card. You can protect your sorcerer or your monsters in general against a sorcerer banish. You can book a Kaiku to summon a chaos monster or to run over it. You can book your own flips. It's nice also to use your spy aggressively with book, like if you attack with both spy and your opponent flip a mirror force, for example, and you can flip book on one of your spy, it's nice because then you can flip the spy to summon the third one. So yeah, overall it allows you to play your flips more aggressively, and also it has an interesting synergy with Return, which isn't too relevant because you're mostly going to use Return to finish the game off, but sometimes it can be useful to use book on a monster that you summoned with Return, because it means that the booked monster will not be banished again at the end phase, and it will stay on the field. So this is an interesting interaction that can be actually relevant from time to time. So yeah, and also I don't main Snatch. I know some player told me that I should main it. Again, it's a bit debatable. I'm not too sure because I like my cards to be live early game, and we already have Return, which can be a brick if you draw it in your opening hand. And sometimes I don't like that you have to hold Snatch for too long, especially in a deck that doesn't have Tsukuyomi or Tributes. And Snatch is nice when you side it in, when your opponent side out their Book of Moon, or when you're playing against aggro. So I think it's fine as a side, but you could main it, I think, if you find the room for it, like over a book, for example. Like you could replace one dust with MST, replace one book with Snatch, so some minor chances like that. So I think I said everything about the main deck. Now about the side deck. Of course the side deck can vary depending on the metagame and stuff. So I have a second Azura, so I can replace Roulette Barrel. Again, I think Roulette Barrel isn't good against control because, I mean, yeah, it doesn't really do much. It's just a Thousand-Eyes Restrict bait, like, it's not great. So, but Azura is great to actually take advantage of your Return, even if your opponent has Scapegoat. So I think 2 Azura against control is nice. And it's also good against Reasoning Gates that play Scapegoat. You could also, if you take out one books of the main deck, you could side it against control still. So against Chaos Turbo, what I do is I side books for mind control, which is really nice, especially considering that we have Gravekeeper Spy. So if we steal a spy, we get a search and get your own spy. So it's nice. And of course, you can also side the Snatch against Chaos Turbo. Against Warrior, I got some stuff like to replace my Knock, Undershoot, and one book with Saku and 7 Tool and Snatch and potentially MST. So because of course, I mean, Sakutsu Armor is one of the most consistent way to deal with Warrior, since it's never dead and it's also a great top deck. So, and when both players are low on cards, Saku is very good. And 7 tool is also nice because it's kind of a 4th Solen, so you can negate your opponent's Solen and any kind of traps that could be annoying to deal with. Third shoot can also be sided against Chaos Turbo when you're going first. We got Mind Crush and Stein for combo decks. I think this deck has a very good matchup against combo deck because of course we have the Solen main, but we also have strong turn 1 play. Like generally combo decks don't play Nobleman of Crossout, though you have to be careful about stuff like Mind Control if you play against Empty Jar. But like for example against Reasoning Gate, like you can just set a flip turn 1, which is better than just summoning a warrior in attack position. So you have better turn 1 plays than warrior, a better defense because you have recruiters and spies. So against Reasoning Gate, it's nice. And of course you have the Solen in main, you have the Stein, you have the Mind Crush. So and combo matchup I think is pretty good, and I've played against combo a bunch of time in tournaments and I never lost yet with this deck, so of course I think I got lucky, but either way I think the matchup against combo is pretty good. I got 2 Mobius for Royal Decree and also for stuff like Burn with Gravity Bind and stuff like that. I don't really side Mobius against Algo. I mean you could, but it's not amazing because if you get Solemn it kind of sucks, but you could since you have the Spy and you have Solemn and 7 tool to negate their own Solemn, so you could maybe side 1 against Algo. That's a possibility. And yeah, I think I said everything. So overall I really like how versatile the deck is. Like it's an aggro deck, but it can actually afford to play a bit slowly, like by stalling with Spy and stuff like that, since you have a late game win condition, you have a strong late game plays with Sorcerer and stuff. So that's what I really like about this deck, is that it's an aggressive deck, but it's not as linear as a Warrior deck. Don't get me wrong, I think Warrior's deck are very very good, and I'm not saying that this deck is straight up better, but yeah, I just think it's more fun to play, and I'm more comfortable with the decks that can win in a bunch of different ways. And I also like that the deck has very high synergy with return with all the stuff I mentioned, like the trap lineup, the flips and stuff like that, the beaters. But despite having a lot of synergy with return, it doesn't fully rely on it. You can still win games without return. Unlike Bazoo Return, which is also a good deck, but rely on return a lot more to win. Even though of course it has some upside, like being able to pull off very strong plays with Triple Tunnel Dragon and Bazoo and stuff like that. But yeah, I think this deck is very versatile and it's just very good. So I really hope that more people try it in the future, because like I said, I'm not a very very good player and I still do well in tournaments with it. So I think that if more competitive players will try the deck in tournament, maybe they will do well. So yeah, anyway, I hope you liked the deck profile, and feel free to comment and I will try to respond to any question you have, and see you next time.